Hello everyone, welcome to the next episode on SAP UI5. In the last episode, we had discussed about model concept. We had also talked about multi-model concept. How can our one application can work with multiple models? That's what we had discussed, and we saw that when we were using multiple models, there is always a name which you have to assign, a unique name, and with that unique name, system would be able to recognize your model specifically provided you have multiple models in the application. So now let's get started and discuss about another most important concept of the model, which is called binding modes. So by far we saw that we also have a property binding which picks up the data from the model for our user interface control. So now what is binding mode? Why we need binding mode, and what are the different binding modes we have it available with SAP UI5? Let's discuss that. But before we discuss, let's quickly have a look at again our scenario. So what we have is we have a view, and this view, what we see here, is actually having, let's say, an input field, and I got my input field here which is displaying some data, and this data is being picked up from the model. So you have your model, and this particular model, you have a JSON property based on its path. So you will probably follow a path in this JSON, and this path is derived out of a file. So you have also your JSON file. In this JSON file, you have your typical JSON where you have your entity name and then colon, curly braces, and your property name of this entity, and so on, its value, and then further on you just kind of close all these things up. So this is your typical JSON, how it looks like. And then you have a model created out of this JSON file, right? A model object has been created out of this JSON file by loading the data, and then in this you have the path of this property slash entity slash property. So that's your path of the property, and same path you're binding with your UI element on the user interface, correct? So if you all remember, this is the example which we had tried by far in the past, and we saw that we exactly make the whole thing work together in this way, correct? So you have your model, you have your view, all these things work together with the help of this binding concept like this, correct? Now what we observed that whenever there is a data in the model file which is loaded in your model object, and when I do this binding with the UI interface, with the user interface control, UI control, with our property of the JSON, and based on, let's say, your default model is this model is a default model, it picks up the data automatically from your path, from your model, and shows that data to the user interface, correct? So we saw that any data which you have inside the model is getting displayed in the view, correct? Right, guys, this is what we observed in our last class, that any data you have it in your model which you have created from the JSON probably, and that model has been made as a default model, and then when you later on do the binding with the UI5 control, let's say an input field control, and you give the path, what was happening is the data was getting displayed automatically. If you remember the example of our input field, in that input field we have set of input fields, and these set of input fields were taking data from different properties of your JSON, correct? So this is what we have seen. So maybe I'll just quickly show you once again on the user interface which we created. So let me just quickly go into my SAP Web ID Personal Edition and show you once again, just to recap a little bit, the binding which we have done. And we have also seen 4 different syntaxes to do that binding. So if you just come back to our project, which is uh, model basics, and look at here, let me just close these different windows, and we had created a view, and in this view we have done the binding with the JSON path, correct, guys? This is the path which we with which we have binded all the different properties in the JSON file. And then when we did that and when we execute this application, we saw all the data was picked up automatically from the model. So what exactly this direction of the data? So the direction of the data in this case is from the model to the view, correct? So this is called one-way binding mode, guys. What is one-way binding mode? One-way binding mode is a binding mode where the data is moved from model to the view object. Okay, this is called one-way binding mode where the data is automatically transferred from model to the view. Now what if I say if I change a data in my view, it automatically changes the data in my model, right guys? If I change the data on the user interface, let's say I change this Anubhav to Spider-Man, what I want to see, what's the data now in the model? Do you think the data in the model have now also changed? What do you think? Will it change the data into the model if I change the data into the view? It will, guys, it will. And that's called two-way binding mode, which means any change done in the view would also reflect the changes in the model. This is called two-way binding mode. So this is the default binding mode for JSON model. I will now show you in the system. So let's have a quick look at some of the APIs which we use with model. So using model object, we can use following APIs. What are all these APIs? So if you have a model object, let's say O model, let's say O model is your model object, you can, if you want to read data inside model, you can call get property method and pass the path. Okay, this is what you can do. On the other hand, if you want to change the data inside model, which method can you call, guys? What do you think? Which method will you be calling if you want to change the data inside the model? Which method will you be calling to read the data? We are calling get property method. To change the data, we will call set property method. You remember, guys, setter getter method concept, very powerful. So set property method, let me show you first of all these method calls quickly, and then we will move into experience this two-way binding mode. So first of all, what I'll do is I'll just refresh my application and I would just press F12, and now I have a default binding mode, sorry, default model set at my view level. Hence I can't test it directly in the console until unless I'm in debugging of a method, because this model is set at the view level. So let me probably first change the model setting at the application level. So we have created our model into the controller, and here we are setting it only at the view level at this point of time. Okay, now I will change this instead of this dot get view, I will just put everywhere this dot or sap.ui dot get core dot controller. So yes, so I am setting it now at the global level, guys. First of all, so just to demonstrate, replace all. So everywhere I have now changed um, the object to SAPUI get core, which means now this model is set at what level? Anyone? At what level this model will be set? So by far it was at the view level, only this view can access this data, but now it's global. It's a global model. Every view, every controller in your application can access this data because this is set at the runtime application level. Okay, so this is at the application level. We have now set this particular model, correct guys? So that's what exactly we have done now. So what next? So next what we will see is we will go ahead and experience it. So I'll just come back and refresh. So now I can easily go to console and I can get the model object using get core. So I can say var o model equals to this dot um, sorry, not this, it's SAP UI get core, and then I can say get me the model which is your default model. And if I show you model object, this is your model object which is set at the uh, at the UI5 application level, guys. Now if you want to read all the values, what will be the path, guys? Can anybody tell me the path of my my top node of the JSON? Can anybody tell me the path of my top node of the JSON? What will be the path of my top node? This is my top node. What is the path of this top node of the JSON? Anybody? It's just slash. What is the path of my employee str entity set? What is the path of my employee str entity set? It is slash empstr. What is the path of my employee name? Anyone? What is the path of my employee name? It is slash employee str slash employee name. Right? Clear, everyone? So if I want the top level, all the data of my JSON with to read, I will just use slash as the path, which is the top level curly brace path. So let's come back and I say o model dot get property, and I say slash, that's it. And you see it is showing you the data which is there inside top node. In the top node you have empstr, in empstr you have all these properties. So congratulations, get property method, you all understood what is it doing. So let me put this code snippet also into the PPT so that later on you can check this example. So first get the model object, very important. Without getting the model object, how can you call the method of the model object? So we have set it at the app level and hence we can get it quite easily. And then if I want to change the value of employee name, what is the path of employee name? Anybody? What is the path of employee name? I call set property. And what is the path of employee name? Anybody, can you tell me what is the path of employee name property? Slash mpstr slash employee name, and let's say I want to change it to richa, so I just put slash mpstr employee name as my path, comma, my value which I want to now put it into the particular employee name. So can anybody tell me what will happen if I do this? What do you think? What changes you would see on user interface if I do this? Anybody? What do you think? What is your observation? Just now, by far, we saw what is a one-way binding. What will happen? Yes, it will change my employee name. It's a one-way binding. Any change done in the model will reflect directly onto the view. It's a one direction at least working. So one-way binding. Oops. You see, guys, it did not change. Why? Are we doing
The ename entity is, I mean, it is ename, it's not emp name.
perfect, Raji? Is that Raji?
Yes,
Okay,
I'm good.
Raji, you're right. So set property, the property name which we had put is incorrect. It's not EMP name, because if you just go back and check it out in your code, in your, oops, sorry, let me just go to my code here, and you would find that I have my data here, and you see it's e name, it's not emp name, guys, it's e name. That's the reason it's not working. And if I come back slash emp str slash e name, I want to change it to richer, and then enter, and voila, you see on the user interface the data is popping up. This is one way binding, guys. Any change in the model would reflect on the user interface. Now my next question to all of you, what do you think? What do you think? If I change this data here in the model, will it change in the file also? Anybody? Do you think the data will change in the file also if I change the data in the model? Do you think there is a change in the file also? Will it change my file from where I'm deriving the data? Of course not. Okay, guys, it won't touch your file. File is static. Your data is always played whenever you're making such changes and things like that. They are always played around with the model. What is a model? It is an object of this is data. Okay, it's an object, guys. So we are not going to do also any file handling. File handling is a technique to store read data in in old softwares. So when we were like in schooling days, that time we used to do file handling using io processing using C programming, right? So that's a very old way of storing data. After that we have the world of databases, where we store data in databases, in database management systems. And now we have SAP HANA with in-memory database, in-memory computing engine. So now you don't learn file handling. So file is just right now for example purpose we created, and we loaded. Any change in the model is purely into the object, guys. So many people gets confused here. Remember, it's a change in the object. Next time if you refresh, it will reload the data from a file, and you would see the data again displayed as Anubhav on the user interface, because we don't change in the file permanently. Okay, now you may be also wondering, Anubhav, how do you change then your Mara table, your VBAC table, your VBAP table? All that we will come to later point of time. Right now we are not into that game. We are just understanding very basic, very low level concept of model called one way and two way binding. So that's a one way binding. So what I did, I again repeat, I first get the model object, and then I just change the property name to Richa, and you see the changes reflects on the UI. Now let me just also do a get property for this employee name. So let me just use this path and say o model dot get property, and put this over here, press enter. You see the data inside the model is also Richa, and the data on the user interface is also Richa. Clear, guys? So now coming to the two-way binding, if I change the data on the UI, is this change reflect my model also? Yes or no? Let's try that out. So with that we will understand. So now I will change Richa to Richard. Okay, and okay, Richa to Richard, and now I'll just do a get property. What do you think, guys? What will happen? Will your model now show you the data as Richard, or it shows you Richa? It will show Richard, guys, because it's a two-way binding mode by default. You see the data in the model got changed automatically when you make a change on the UI. So any change made on the UI also reflected back to the model. This is called two-way binding. So what is your conclusion here? What is your conclusion here? What is the default binding mode for JSON model? What is your conclusion? What is the default binding mode for JSON model? It's a two-way binding mode. So what is a two-way binding mode? Any change in view will also change data of model object. Remember, it's always model object. File is completely isolated. It has nothing to do with file. Okay, very important point. Any change in the view will also change data in the model object, and vice versa. Okay, this is your two-way binding mode. Clear, guys? Two-way binding mode. Then comes is the one-time binding mode. So what is one-time binding mode? One-time binding mode is, it's again little different, and you see the name itself tells you what exactly it is. One time. One time means only once. When your application starts, it will load data from model in view. Any changes further in model or view doesn't change each other. Okay, that's called one time binding mode. If you want to create a model where you just want to initially pick up the data, you don't want to do any other changes at all, you can go with one time binding mode. So let's get started and experience this one way and one time. So we are experiencing by far two way binding. How can I change this binding mode? So it's very simple. You use o model dot set default binding mode API, and in this you can pass a constant which will tell you what type of binding mode you want, one way, two way, or one time. You can also check this out, documentation for this on UI5 SDK. Let me just quickly show you. So I go to my UI5 SDK and see how can I change the binding mode for any model. So come to documentation and just search for binding mode. There you go, setting the default binding mode, and you will find here set default binding mode API for the model object. You can see here they're passing a constant value SAP UI model binding mode one way. You can see clearly one time, and similarly there is a two-way also. So let's go ahead and change it to one way now. So I will just come back where we are creating model object. So here we created the model object. So after creating the model object, I'll just say o model dot set default binding mode, and I'll just say to SAP UI model binding mode. That's a constant, guys. Hope it is one. Yes, SAP UI model binding mode, and I will change it to one way binding mode. Clear? So I change it to one way binding mode. What does it mean? Anybody? What does it mean? What will happen now? Anybody? What will happen with one way binding mode? What is the meaning of one way binding mode? Anybody? What is one way binding mode? Any change in the model only will reflect to the view. If you change Richard to Richard now, it will not work. It will not make the change reflected back to the model. Okay. So that's what exactly one way is. Let's go ahead and experience it now in the system. So don't trust Anubhav. Don't trust anybody. Just trust yourself, trust the example, trust the system, what system has to say about it. Okay, so refresh here, and now you'll see first of all Anubhav. I will now change the data first of all in the model. So let me get the model object and now change the data in the model. You see guys, I will just do a set property and I will change it to Richa again. Now will this work or not work? Anybody? I am changing the data in the model. Will it reflect on UI or not? Yes, it will. This is called one way binding mode. Press enter. You see it got changed to user interface Richa. Now, what about the other way around? The other way around is something when you change data on the UI. If I change it to Richard, okay. Now, what do you think, guys? Any change made on the UI, will it work or not? Of course not. It's a one way binding mode now. So I say o model dot get property, and I just call the get property emp name ename, press enter, and you see, oops, it changed it. There is something wrong. There is something definitely wrong. Why it changed the data inside the model? I'm not sure. It shouldn't have ideally changed. It's a one-way binding mode. There is some problem. It's for sure some problem. Set default binding mode SAP UI model one time. Was there any console error? I'm not sure. I just refresh once again just to see if there is no console error. Okay, so I think I forgot to refresh last time. Let me change the data on the model again. Set property Richa, and you see it changes on the UI, and now I change it to Richard, and I just do a get property, and oops, it's changing, guys. I'm not sure why it is behaving like this, but ideally it should not. What ideally should happen, it should be a one-way binding mode, which means only the data changes on the user on the model would reflect on the UI. However, changes made on the UI should not reflect back to the this thing. And I think the problem here is the base. So I think I'm changing it at the wrong place here. This is the wrong place. Maybe I just go inside the reusable method, create emp json model, and I will change it inside that. So let me just go to models.js. Here we are loading the data and returning. Before returning, let me change this. So maybe after creating this, I'll change it here, guys, in the base level. So set default binding mode, and then SAP UI model binding mode one way. Save this. We are done. Save this. We are done. Yeah. Let's now experience this. Refresh. And I would first change data on the here. I'll change it. It changes. Yes. And I'll change it to Richard now. And let's see if the data, just do a get property and see. You see guys, yes, it works now. You see when I do a get property now, it is not changing. Though I change the user interface data, you see it's not reflecting back into the model. That clearly says that any change done in the model, any change which you're doing in the model is reflecting on the UI. However, any change made on the UI is not transported back to the model. This is not done. Why it is not done? Why it is not working? Anybody? Can you tell me why the data changes on the UI is not working in the model? Because it's a one-way binding mode. Only one direction traffic is allowed. Another direction of traffic is not allowed, right? It's a one-way binding mode. Let's experience now one-time binding mode, which is even more interesting. So I go back and change here to one time. Be careful, it's case sensitive. So one time and I refresh. Now tell me guys, what will happen? Oops, you see now even first time itself it doesn't get the data. I don't understand. I think there is some problem. Let me just check the SDK, what SDK has to say, the type of mode. It's one time, we have put it correctly. Ideally it should have taken data initially from the model, but it's not. I'm not sure. Again, there is some trick here. Why it's not so working as such. Ideally it should have taken data initially from the model and displayed that to me on the user interface, but it's not doing that. I'm not sure. Maybe I just try changing now it outside. So you see, even the effect of this accordingly works based on where you are putting your code. Okay, so if you are modularizing your code, just make sure you are putting it the right place, because effect of it accordingly matters. Because when it comes to controller, here it is another local variable. It creates as an another local variable. Okay, so that's why you need to be little careful when you are working with the model objects. I'm not sure why am I not able to show you testing one time. Maybe just try one more time here. So only first time it will take the data from the model object, and next subsequent changes made into the model neither reflects on the UI nor any change made on the. So it's not working here actually. So this is not at all going to work. So only thing which I was supposed that it will work is this one, but this one also not working. There's some problem. It's not behaving the way we expect them. So one time and just try one more time guys. Let's see. No, it's not working guys. I'm not sure, some problem. But ideally hope you understood the concept. What is one time? One time means initially it will load the data, it will take the data from the model object, and further on if there is any change you make, any change you make uh, to the model, it won't reflect on the UI. Neither a change made on the UI it changes your data in the model. So that's something, a side effect free model which you want to create many times. So if there is a need that you want to create a model where you want to just make sure that no changes on the UI would change your data, then you will go definitely with one time binding mode. Clear everyone? What is one time binding mode? Unfortunately I'm not able to showcase this. It's little weird behavior here. What will be the scenario where one way and two way binding mode will be well used? So in all the scenarios we always go with two way binding mode guys. So two way is the best binding mode. We don't touch default. Whatever SAP has made default binding mode, that's what we typically go with. Okay, we don't change it. Okay, and it is the most favorable scenario, the two-way binding mode guys. Okay, you will see in upcoming days a use case of two-way binding mode, much more interesting and much more relevant in this context. Okay, so I will show you the use case also in next upcoming section. Okay, then moving next, what is binding mode? One time means value is only read from the model once. Yes Udit, you're right. So the data will be read only once from the model, and then they both are disconnected. Both your model and your view both are disconnected. They don't know each other afterwards. Any change you do in the model doesn't change the view. Any change you do in the view doesn't change the model. Okay, can we try moving line number 20 to line number 9 and see if it works? Okay, let's try that. I don't think so it will work. The reason is because this is a completely different file. If you put all the code in one single file, probably it may work, but I'm not sure why it's behaving like this in here. But let's try that. So I will now move this guy, this gentleman here, to line number 9, and let's save this and experience it. Let's see if it works. No, it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work the way it. So I don't think so why it's not working. I'm also not able to find a reason, but however, I don't think so we would need to use one time mode with the JSON model. This is mainly used with the resource model, and you will know why. When I will teach you resource model, you will know why. Okay, so right now just bear with the system behavior. I'm little surprised to see this weird behavior, but maybe we can probably try it in the other way around later point of time, when I'll try to create things in the system in a more better way, in more standard way, and that time I will maybe showcase you this feature at this level. Okay, now coming next, so we saw all the three types of binding modes, and we saw which type of binding. So what are all the different types of bindings we have in SAP UI5? Can anybody tell me quickly? What are all the types of bindings we have in UI5? Four types of binding. Can anybody quickly name them? We already talked about them in a minute in our previous class, the types of bindings. Yes, correct. It's property, it's aggregation, it's expression, and finally we have element binding. So four types of binding we have seen by far in our course. So which we have started initially with the property binding, and we saw property binding example. So let me just show you where I discussed that. So we had talked about all four of them, but we didn't use all four of them. You see all four of them. So now we are slowly moving to expression binding. What is expression binding? So many times it so happens that you want to evaluate. So what is expression binding? So many times we need to evaluate some expression at runtime. Okay. For example, I want to change the salary of employee name, and I want to increase salary of employee if the employee name is Anubhav by 10 times. Okay. So example, increase the salary of employee if employee name is Anubhav. Okay, that's what I want to do. So how will you do this? How will you do such kind of scenarios? If the sales order amount is more than 20,000, let's say, I want currency to be automatically changed. Okay, something of this sort you want to do it without truly writing some processing logic in the controller, without writing an if else condition, stuff like that. So this kind of small expressions, if you want to evaluate, you can go with expression binding. Here you can put actually very small set of expressions, and those expressions gets evaluated at runtime based on a property, based on a behavior, and then final result of the expression will be pumped into the input, into the fields, or into your binding data. Okay, so that's what happens, expression binding. Let me just show you that. So let's come to SDK and search here for expression binding. You'll see very good examples uh, for expression binding. You can see expression binding here, and you can just come down and you see they're doing kind of expression binding. So it's an XML view. Don't panic. I will show you that also. How do you use expression binding or binding in such in XML views? But you see here is just curly braces for binding indication, and inside there they've put some description. Sorry, they've put some expression. This expression, what it is saying, equals to, expression always starts with equals to. Dollar symbol curly braces means some value from another JSON property. Okay, this is, they are just checking some value from another JSON property, and they are saying if the price of this product is greater than 50, then return an error, else return a success. So this is a typical if condition which you can nicely put as an expression. So what is the syntax for such an if condition in JavaScript? So let me just quickly show that in the PPT. So So you can put the property name. So you can see, so you binding property, whatever property you want to bind with, equals to curly braces. So that should go in double quote, and then you can put an expression inside. So let me now put an expression replacing the same thing. So this is how you usually do binding, isn't it, right? This is how we do binding. And now as an expression, I will put equals to, and my some condition. That's my condition, question mark. And if the condition fulfill, what should happen? So this is, if the condition is true, what should I return? So what should I return when fulfill? Okay. And then colon, what if doesn't fulfill? Okay, this is how you actually use an expression. Now in the condition, you can also put some condition by considering property of your JSON. So you can put dollar symbol, curly braces, and some other property, other JSON property path which you want to check. And then you can put some operator, and you can put some operand. So this is a typical example of a condition, and then you of course return something based on that. So clear, guys, this is how expression binding works. Let me show you an example quickly. So my use case is, if employee name is Anubhav, increase salary by 10 times. Okay, that's what I want to do in my expression binding. So let me just do that. So I just come here. Okay, sorry, I just have to close all these windows. This is my AMDP code for ABAP on HANA. I just have to close this ABAP manage data procedure in ABAP. So then just, so that there are not too many windows to work with, I just come here. Okay, so here let's say you can see this is the binding for salary, right, guys? This is the binding for salary. So what I want to build an expression. So I say curly braces. Okay, so maybe I just say directly with value property, and this value property should not bind to path, it should bind to an expression. Okay, and I put curly braces equals to, which indicates that further on whatever I'm going to write is an expression. I want to check employee name, so I put again dollar symbol to see my employee path slash empstr slash e name, and I'll just see if this employee name is equals to Anubhav. Okay, if it is equals to Anubhav, then what you do is you return the salary as your current salary multiply by 10. Okay, so I put dollar curly braces my salary property path and multiply it with 10, else colon symbol, whatever is the current salary, you put it in the curly braces for employee. This is what I am doing, guys. This is an expression which I've created, a quick expression you can create like this in UI5 like this. It's very easy to operate. It is much faster. You don't have to write any complex controller logic to fulfill this. However, again, I'm saying this is not the only way. We have also a way where we can write some processing logic using controller, like if, else, something of that sort. Maybe for some of you this may look like little complex at this moment, but it is more flexible. You can just quickly code in the expression and that's it. But yet again, we don't use such operations. Why? The reason is it's kind of a processing logic, and it should not be kept in a view. Okay, but just in case, for your convenience, if you want to use it, there is a feature in the system, there is a provision in the system. You can of course go ahead and use such things. I save this, and now I just come back and test it. Now before we do anything, let's change the binding mode again back to the two-way. So I'll comment out my binding mode setting things, and then let's experience it on the UI. So right now, what was the value of the salary which we had in the file? It was 2500. And let's see, now the employee name is already Anubhav. Press enter here, and let's see what happens. Oops, salary itself is not popping up. There is some problem. Okay, there is some problem. Let me just remove this guy, multiplying 10, and just see what happens if I just put enter. So I want to start not with this complex expression first. Maybe I just want to see placing some value into the expression. So I cut this expression, put it into a notepad file, and just see if I just return a salary value, what happens as an expression. So I am putting dollar symbol, my curly braces, and the path of the salary property, and let's see at least if this much works, and then we slowly enhance our expression. You see this itself is not working. Now one important point, guys, to make such an expression binding work, you need to guide your UI5 saying that we can do such a complex binding. So expression binding is also comes under a category of called complex binding. Now for such complex binding to work, you need to clearly give power. You need to clearly tell your UI5 framework that, boss, I'm going to use kind of a complex binding for this purpose. So for that, come to index HTML, and here in the index HTML you have got to put a special syntax called data SAP UI binding type as complex. You can find that syntax also into UI5 SDK. So come here and just search for complex, and just data binding calculated, use complex syntax for define. I don't see that. Okay, let me just search directly SAP data SAP UI binding syntax complex. This is the syntax you have to put, guys. You have to tell the UI5 that any binding which you putting it also should support complex binding, guys. So I take this piece of code and I'll say use this piece of code in my bootstrap. So I come here and I put that piece of code here, and I'll say it should support complex type of binding also. So without you putting this, system won't allow you, or system won't propagate, or it won't treat any such expression binding, or properties where you put multiple property together. All that will not work. So this is very bare minimum. You have to tell UI5 framework during bootstrapping that yes, we want to do complex binding also, which comes which supports expression binding as well. Okay, so this is what I missed, and hence that's the reason I guess it was not working. There could be many other reasons, but this is a prerequisite for us to work with the complex type of binding. So let me put it in the PPT in the Fundafox. When we use expression binding or put multiple binding paths together, we use uh, a syntax in bootstrap like below. Yes, like this we will put it. Okay, this is the syntax, we have it. So let's go ahead and experience it now. I'll just save this. Okay, come back to my application and refresh, and now voila, you see, guys, the value is being popping up because now it supports expression binding. Because I told you, i5 boss, give me your support. You should support. If I'm going ahead and putting any expression binding, please help me with that. And UI5 listen to your request, it respond well, and it supported you, and then hence you see your expression, your first very simple expression is now working fine with the view. And now it's time for replacing it with our complex expression which we had created in a notepad file. And I'm just gonna pump in that over here, so I can now make sure feel safe that UI5 will support me to support my expression. I save this, and then I'm just gonna come back and refresh, and you see employee, oops, there is some problem. Now you see there is an error in our syntax, so it's clearly telling you that what's an error this time. Yeah, so earlier this is the kind of thing which was not working, and now it's also telling us if there is any error into the code, and that's what it is pretty much kind of supporting us. But let's see what's the error. It says expected an end of curly braces instead of saw an equals to symbol. Okay, and it's, I think, a problem over here with this gentleman. So this is the guy which is the culprit, and at position number 20 it is saying. So there is some problem here in this piece of code. So let me just be little sure what is that which I'm missing. Should I have to put double equals to as a comparison? Let me just check that. Refresh. No, I think no, that's not the right one. So I just say my employee name. If it is equals to Anubhav, then just multiply salary with 10. Else, just put the salary as it is. Not sure, guys. What am I doing mistake? Let me just go back and check your SDK. I search for expression binding. Come down. You can see here it's just checking something with a greater than symbol. Okay, and just come down and you see equals to expression, and then let me see if there is any operator I can use. Yes, you can use triple equals to, guys, for comparison, and then colon, and then something you can put it. So let me just try that. Triple equals to here for comparison. So I put comparison operator triple equals to with Anubhav, and then let's see if it works. So I come back, there's some problem, and voila. Yeah, it was equals to operator was triple equals to, not single, not double equals to, which it supports. It supports only triple equals to operator for comparison. And do you observe my salary have been become 10 times, guys, the moment I use expression binding? Do you observe that, guys? Do you see that change in your salary? It has become tenfold, 10 times of your current salary if the employee name is Anubhav, right, guys? Do you see this value? 25,000. What was the value in the JSON? It was 2500, correct? You can see that. Come here, see the employee was 2500. It has changed your salary automatically to 10 times. Now what I'll do is I'll change the employee name, and let's see what happens. So I say to Sonia, and you see I press enter. The moment I press enter, system recognize that now employee name is no more Anubhav, and hence it automatically changes salary back to the one which is there inside the real property. It doesn't do any manipulation of this value, neither a multiplication at all. Clear, guys? Is this example clear? Expression binding, a very powerful example of expression binding, to understand the concept of expression binding. But yet again, a disclaimer that we don't use it so extensively, because point one is it can sometimes become so complex when you want to do more and more conditional processing. Second point is you kind of violating little bit of MVC architecture, where some processing logic is embedded inside the view. Ideally we should not. But yet you have a feature, you have an option. In interview somebody may ask you an example for expression binding, and here you have an example to demonstrate. You can also tell why it's not working. Many times it may so happen that we are working with expression binding but it doesn't work. Is the reason is because we forgot to put a special syntax over here into the system. Clear, everyone? The expression binding. So that's our second type of binding. Now coming into the third type of binding, which is aggregation binding. So what is aggregation binding? So aggregation binding is typically done. So we saw property binding, where we were using property of a UI5 control to do the binding, and now we move to aggregation binding. So aggregation binding is nothing but when we bind aggregation of a control to the model entity, this becomes aggregation binding. Okay, the path which participate in aggregation binding is known as absolute path. Okay, this is known to be called absolute path, and the children's of aggregated control also needs to be binded with a relative path of absolute path. Okay, I would just end it here. It should also be binded, okay, with relative path. Okay, the children should also be binded with relative path. So let's take an example. I want to create a table. Okay, I want to create a table. So anyone, can you create a table with a structure? It does it make sense to create a table with a structure? Anyone? Do you display a table for a structure? No. Table is used for a more like an array type of data, right? So we need to also enhance our JSON quickly to just produce some array of data. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly go back and I'm just gonna enhance our JSON, which we had created here with another entity called EMP table, EMP tab. Okay, and anybody, what is the symbol in JSON you use to indicate a table? Anybody? Which symbol in JSON JavaScript object notation to indicate a table? It's an array. Perfect, Swami, you've got it right. And now inside this here we will be putting all the properties, all the rows. So one row, first row, this is first row, this is second row, and that's a third row, and that's a fourth row, and it's a fifth row, it's a sixth row, it's a seventh row. Like that I can put multiple records inside this. And what I want is, maybe I want to use all these properties as it is, and that's my row number one. Clear, everyone? That's my row number one for my JSON. Okay, that's my row number one. Similarly, I'm replicating these many rows. Okay, I replicated these many rows, and I just start with employee number 100, Anubhav 2500 INR, employee number 200, Richa 3000 INR, employee number 300, Swami 9000 USD, 400, Rimmi 2800 euros, 500, Raji 9500 BPD, 600, Jack 8400 INR, 700, Meenakshi 8600 euros, 800, Gopal 1500 INR. So you see, I have created multiple records now inside my JSON. So how do you validate your JSON? Anybody? How do you validate your JSON? If there is a JSON you have in your system, yes, perfect answer. Copy this JSON, go to JSON lint. I always recommend my students to first validate JSON before you put them. So go here, jsonlint.com, validate it, and you see it's a valid JSON. Pretty nice tool, very interesting. And you can see now your records of employee are here. You can group them quickly, nicely, and that's the beauty of JSON lint. You can see clearly indicating that you have an employee tab, and this employee tab has multiple properties for you which you have. And now how many entities I have inside my JSON? In whole of my JSON, how many entities I have? Anybody? How many entities I have in my whole of JSON? Two entities, one is EMP_str, one is EMP tab, right guys? So that's how I created my table, data for table. Okay, this is the data for table, and now we will just go ahead and create a table control. It's very easy. So what you need to start with the table control. Now remember guys, table control is a complex control. Complex not by its nature, by its the way we process it. Okay, we don't really, it's not that difficult to learn, but it's called complex control because it has other controls inside it. Okay, now can you display data in a table without columns? Can you display data in a table without columns? Answer is no, you cannot. That's why when we create a table, we always have to add columns inside. That's why it's called complex control, because you add more other controls inside this control to display the data. So let's quickly get started with this very simple table. We have our data ready. Okay, and maybe I'll just come back here and I will create a very simple table control. Okay, so I will come back to our web IDE and I have my data here. That's okay. I close this. I go to my view. Here it is. And now I will just create a simple table control. So let's do that. So I say var or table new SAP UI table library dot table control. I just give an ID table. I just put comma curly braces, and here now in this we can just go ahead and put the properties. So I can probably put here O table, and this is my table control, and I just want to use this table and return that also out of my DOM. So I just do that, save it, and let's have a look at now what it produce on the UI. So I refresh, and oops, it is not working. Any guess why it doesn't work? System says type error, SAP UI table is not a.
We need to add the library in the Bootstrap.
Perfect answer, Raji. Perfect answer. You understood the concept. So SAP UI table is a new library I've used. I forgot to add it in the Bootstrap. Archana is also right. So let's do that quickly. Here you come and just add your SAP UI table. Let's come back, refresh, and voila. You see your table is popping up here with no data into it. You can make a feel of it that yes, it is a table, guys. Yes, it is a table. You can feel that it is a table indeed. Here you can see. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to demonstrate the table. You need to add columns inside. So how do you find which property, which aggregation would bring in the columns inside the table? What do you do? Anybody? What do you do to check, okay, how can I now add columns to this guy called table? Okay, so how do you know? You go to SDK, go to API reference and search for table control here, and then what you do is you just come down and search for table. Here it is, your table control, and straight away go to its aggregation, because aggregation is what makes more sense in this case. Okay, so we will go back to aggregation, and in aggregation we will get to know what are all the different aggregations which the table is actually supporting for me. So I'll just come here to aggregation, and I can see here there is something called, can anybody mute their line? It's causing some echo for me. Okay, you can see there's something called columns aggregation, and each column object is of type SAP UI table column. Okay, so let's go to the columns class. So columns is the aggregation name, and now I go to the columns class and see how a column can be constructed. So I go to the column class, and let me start putting columns of my table here. So I just put columns aggregation array. It's 0 to n cardinality, so multiple columns can come inside a table, and each column object is of type new SAP UI table library column class. Okay, and now I can put inside the property of the column. So we are already in the column class now. Let's go to its properties, and you see there is a width property, height property, resize property, sorted, sort order, group order, filter, lot of different properties, and then again you see some aggregations of the column class. Now that brings me to the label property as well as the template property. So these are two important properties which we need to construct a column in a UI5. Now, what is label? Label, as you all know, it's the header of the column. You can see this is also a table. So you see this label of the column. These are all the label of the column. And what you see here that I have created or SAP have created this table with this label in the bold letter, and then there is a normal text. And what do you see? This particular column is of what type? Anybody? What type of column is this in this particular table? What type of column is this particular table? What is this column? What kind of column is SAP created in this table? Is this a text column? Is this column is a text? It's a link actually. How did SAP created a link inside a table column? And that's what something controlled by template property. So template property controls what will be the type of column you want. Do you want a label? Do you want a link? Do you want an input field inside column? Do you want a radio button? Do you want a checkbox? all that is controlled by the template property of the column. So right now I not get into this template. I'll just put a simple label and then just put here uh, and then again you see it accepts a control object, hence I can pass any object in this. So probably I'll pass a new SAP UI commons label object and then just give a text property, say employee ID to this guy, and then I will also give a template property and say this column should be created as a text view. Okay, it should be created as a text view just to display the data to the user. I want this column, so text view, no data right now I'm putting inside this. There is no data literally, and that's it. It's so easy to create my first column, and hence accordingly I can now replicate multiple columns. So now never copy paste the code, guys. So you are actually have created first column, hence you can now copy paste because you know the reason why this column is created. So let's add 4 columns at this point. So first is employee ID, second is employee name, third is, let's say, salary column, and then the last one which I want is currency. Clear? So these are all 4 columns I have created. I didn't give an ID to any of the column. A good practice is you give an ID to the column, but that's okay. Right now we skipped it. We just gave the label and text view, label, text view, label, text view. So 4 columns we have added inside the columns aggregation of my table control. All of you clear, guys, this particular part? How did we add columns to the table? And let's come back and refresh now. So voila, you see now 4 columns, employee ID, employee name, salary and currency got pumped in, dot created into the system. Clear, everyone? Is this part clear to everyone? How we created a table control, how we added a column inside the table. So first we started with empty table, then we added columns to the table, and now the data. How will the data come? Anybody? How do I bring the data here? What do I do to bring the data? What brings the data? What brings the data inside these input fields? What did we do to bring the data in these input fields? We did binding with model, right? Same type thing, same thing you need to do, bind something with the model, with the table, which should bring the data. Okay, and let's see which property, which aggregation of the table can help me creating the records. So let's go back, and now I just go back to SDK and check here the table control. Here is my table control, and I will see which property can bring the records inside the table. Okay, that's something I have to again ask SDK to tell me which property to bring in. Anybody, any doubt here? I can see some noise. No doubt. Please unmute, please mute your line so that we have a clean recording of this class so that everybody can understand. Please don't unmute your line until you have questions. And you see here there's a rows aggregation. So I'm now going to bind this rows aggregation. Now what is rows? Is this a property? Anybody? Is the row is a property? Is this rows is a property? Is this a property? What is it? Is it a property? Anybody? Is this a property? It's an aggregation. You can see it's actually an aggregation, guys. So what type of binding we will be doing? What is the type of binding then it is? Is it a property binding? Anyone? Is it a property binding? If I do a binding with these rows, is this a property binding? No, it's an aggregation binding because you're binding with an aggregation. That's it. That's the only difference, nothing else. The technique remains same. You got to bind ultimately with the JSON path. So what I'll do is I'll come down and I use my table and I will tell the system boss, this table should do a bind rows because rows is an aggregation slash emp tab. That's the path from where it should pick all the records. Okay, that's the path from where it should pick all the records for me. You see emp tab here, this is the path slash starting from top slash emp tab from where it has to pick all the records, and now it's representing an array. In this array you have multiple records, correct? So now if you just run your app once again, you would see that some data would be popping up inside your table because you have done an aggregation binding. This is an example of aggregation binding. It's just that doesn't change anything much, but it's just that you're binding now with the aggregation of the table control. Now will it bring the data on my screen? Yes or no? Anybody? Do you think this will showcase all the data which I have in my in my JSON inside my columns? Yes or no? What do you think? Will it show me the data? Now you see right now it's saying no data. Let's see what happens when I refresh. I refresh and you see no data is gone and there is some data coming up. You see some check boxes here. Some data is coming up, but why my data is not displayed in my columns? Anybody? Why they are not displayed in my columns? The reason is your UI5, your table doesn't know that inside your JSON. So you have your model. Inside your model, you have an EMP tab. Okay. Inside the EMP tab, it knows the table should take data from EMP tab. But inside EMP tab, there is employee ID, employee number, salary, currency. It doesn't know that which property of this employee tab, like EMP ID, should get data in which column. That binding is also required. Okay. So it doesn't know inside EMP tab now there is an employee name which should supply data to which column? Employee name column. That binding is currently missing. Okay. So that is what we are now planning to do. So we have first done the binding with EMP tab at the top level with the table, which tells the table that pick the data from here. This is called absolute path. Okay. This is called absolute path, guys. Okay. And whatever now this one, this children's of absolute path, what are all these children's? Are they absolute? Are they direct children of model? Are they absolute? Are they direct children of model? These paths, these children's, they are children of absolute path. Hence, they are relative. Okay, they are relative to absolute. This is called. These are all called relative paths. So you will do binding of relative path corresponding to absolute path with employee ID. So what will be the path of employee ID? Anybody? What is the path of employee ID? If I show you the data, what do you think? What will be the path of employee ID? You don't put now EMP tab before that because your table is already connected to EMP tab, which is the top level, and a sub level is EMP ID, which is a relative one. So employee path will be just slash EMP ID. That's it, because your table is already know this parent. Table already knows parent. You just need to tell the child. That's it. Clear, everyone? You just need to tell the child. Table already knows parent. You just need to tell the child. You don't even have to use slash because it's multiple rows. It's a repeating for every record, same property. Hence you don't even have to use slash again. So just use EMP ID. So that's what I'll do. I go back to view, and here you see we have put a text view control. I just get into text property, and then I just put binding with EMP ID. Done, guys. This is binding with relative path. This is a property binding because I'm binding with the property and binding with relative path. What is it relative with? It's relative to employee tab, correct? So this is binding with absolute path. So this is just a concept. Okay, it's just a concept. So absolute path and relative path is just a concept. An important interview question: what is absolute path? A path which participates in the aggregation binding is an absolute path. A path which is participating into the binding of subordinates, children's of absolute, are the relative path. Now I just did a binding here with relative path. Let's come back and refresh. Voila. What do you see? Data popping up for employee ID. Why other data is not coming? Why employee name, salary, currency not coming? Anyone? What do you think? What is the reason other column data is not popping up? Because they are not yet mapped with the properties. They are not yet connected to the relative path of the subordinate, to the children's. So e name, salary, and currency, these are all the paths, relative paths. So let's put them. Text property, curly braces, e name. You can also use other syntax. I am comfortable with this syntax, hence I'm using it everywhere. Same syntax. And then I say salary, and then I say text. Save this. Let's come back, refresh, and voila, you see your table is ready. Wow. That's it, guys. How amazing. Concept of aggregation binding and absolute path, concept of relative path binding with property binding with individual columns. Hope it's clear, guys. What is an aggregation binding? What is a property binding? What is an expression binding? Very amazing example. So exercise for all of you for today. Please convert this JavaScript view to an XML view. Okay. Convert the JS view with binding to XML view. Let's see who can complete this exercise. So including binding concept, you need to convert our current view, which is showing table and input fields, to a XML view with the binding. Clear, guys? This is what all of you need to do. Data is already there, model is already there, controller is already there. Just the view you need to convert to an XML view. Let's see who all can do this exercise. In tomorrow's class, we'll see the solution of this. Very important also. We'll look into it because majority of the views are XML views. Clear, everyone? Any doubt before we close today's class? Bind rows to EMP tab is done afterwards. Before it, during the table creation, we bind it with the relative path. Still works. Yes, it will still work because the binding is done. It's more like design time. You're telling the column, okay, you take the data from here. Now it completely matters that if you supply data to table, then only it can pick. So what happens if you bind something with a path and that path doesn't exist? Nothing will happen. System won't give you an error. Okay, so that's what exactly happening. I have done the binding with the paths of these columns. Okay, you see I've put the paths of these columns. By any chance, if you miss out the bind rows, what will happen? Nothing will happen. It's just that data won't come because now it doesn't know slash emp tab. The table itself doesn't know it. So children's also will become orphan. Okay, when parents die, children become orphan. That's what happens. This parent, which is a table of these columns, it dies. It doesn't have now the employee tab connectivity. Hence your children's now cannot find this relative path, and as a result you will see data won't load up. Nothing else will happen. You won't get an error, but data won't come up. That's the concept of binding. If there is no path existing corresponding to your binding, simply it will be ignored. No data will be loaded, and that's what you see in real-time projects. Many time data not loading issue are usually related to bindings only. Okay, they are usually related to bindings only. Is the checkbox is defined for every table, or did we do something for same? It's default. So you see there is a checkbox popping up here. That's a default for all the tables. Okay, you can remove this. There is a setting, and that's your next exercise. Find a relevant API to remove the checkbox from the table. Okay, which is automatically coming. This is all you all have to do it along with converting it to XML views. Okay. Okay, Raji is asking that question already. Next. So Raji, you have to try that out. I'm sure you can find out. If Anubhav can do, you all can do it. You all know the reason. Where will you find this API to remove the checkbox? Anyone? What do you think? SDK, correct. So check SDK, explore documentation. I'm sure you will find one. At least this much I can give it to you, and as an exercise, you need to start exploring about coding this thing using SDK, guys, because Anubhav is not there with you, coding your all example in real time. SDK will help you in future. Okay, that's what you need to do. How do we add scroll bar to table? It gets added automatically when your number of records getting exceeded. System will automatically put scroll bar. Let me quickly show you. At least that I can show you. I remember the property name. So it's called visible row count property for table. I can just go back and put that visible row count property, and I'll make it 4. So what will happen now? Only 4 records will be visible. Any extra record will automatically get a scroll bar in the table. One more important thing I want to do is put this table on the top before the simple form so that it looks much better. Just come back, refresh, and voila, you see now there are only 4 rows displayed at a time, and you get a nice simple scroll bar for the table. Clear? So that's what I think you were asking, and here we go. So simple. Just check out SDK, you'll find the property. Okay, Swami. Okay, how to remove those? What to remove those? There are about two empty rows at the end. That's what you do. You just restrict your number of rows to less, and then it kinds of automatically removed it. You got a kind of scroll bar, and then you don't see those extra empty rows, because earlier the visible row count was 10. We had only 6 rows, hence 4 rows were displayed empty, and there's no way to remove them. It's until you do some expression binding or a complicated binding with some coding evaluation. So you cannot simply remove them. You have to write some code in JavaScript to actually do that. Now, model is JSON model. For XML views, should we use XML model? No. You can use JSON model with XML views completely, Meenakshi. There is no hard and fast rule that for XML view you use only XML model. I didn't even teach XML model, so don't expect me to give you an exercise which involves XML model. So I never do that. You all know that I don't give you high dose of antibiotic, because I didn't even discuss about that concept yet. How will I give you an exercise on that concept? So just go with the flow. Whatever I taught you is ample enough for you to convert it to an XML view. Again, I repeat, only today evening 8 o'clock, 12 hours of time to complete this exercise. Any solution sent after that, I will discard that email. I will not have a time to review your changes. I need some time to review your code. Hence, I would request you, please send it in next 12 hours. Beyond that, it is completely discarded. I don't even look at your email for that matter regarding exercise. Okay. With that, it's a wrap on today's class. See you tomorrow at the same time. We'll look at the solution for this exercise. Have a nice day and goodbye.